Welcome back to the Fight Society podcast. I'm your host, Damon Martin. Back from Vegas. UFC 209 was last week. We were off the air because I was in Vegas and enjoying the fights out there. As much as there were fights to enjoy. Unfortunately, we didn't get the fight. A lot of people wanted to see the fight. I admit I wanted to see the most. Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. It was a kind of a crazy week. In the lead up to the fight, it felt like the fight between Tony and Khabib was kind of the de facto main event. No offense to Tyron Woodley and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. It did seem like there was more attention on that fight, but we didn't get to see it. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. Also, I want to preview our guests for the show this week. We're going to be talking in just a few minutes to UFC Fight Night in Brazil headliner Kelvin Gastelum, who is taking on Vitor Belfort this Saturday night live and free on FS1. Also, we're going to talk to top 10 ranked lightweight contender Michael Chiesa, who was recently pushing for a fight with Eddie Alvarez. He didn't get that fight. And now we're going to talk to him about what comes next, possibly involving one of the guys who didn't get to fight at UFC 209, perhaps? Wait and see with that one. But, UFC 209 was kind of a crazy week. I was sitting in the weigh-ins for the day that Khabib had to pull out. And it was kind of a crazy morning because, these early weigh-ins, you've kind of gotten used to something happening. Someone missing weight, someone not showing up, fights getting canceled. It's kind of crazy. Like almost all of the big events in the last, 6 or 7 months that had something weird happen at the weigh-ins. UFC 200 was Miesha Tate almost showing up late. That was days after John Jones got pulled from the card, which that had nothing to do with the weigh-ins, but it was kind of a crazy situation. You had Johnny Hendricks miss weight that day. Then you had, UFC 205, which was, Kelvin Gastelum, unfortunately, not being able to make weight, and because of the 5-pound weight limit rule in New York, his fight with Cowboy got pulled from the card entirely. Then you had UFC 209 this last weekend with Khabib Nurmagomedov being pulled off the card. It was kind of it's just been a crazy set of circumstances that has kind of followed around with some of these early weigh-ins, and now we didn't get to see maybe the best lightweight fight possible with Khabib and Tony. I don't know if we're going to get to see that fight. That's 3 times now that we've had that fight fall apart. Once due to injury to Khabib, once due to injury to Tony, and now this whole weight cutting thing. And listen, I don't think it's fair to just toss Khabib under the boat, because he missed weight. I mean, yes, it is a professional fighter's responsibility to make weight. And I get that. And that's the easiest way to put blame on somebody for that situation. But again, I don't know. I don't know what Khabib was doing that week. I don't know what his diet was. I don't know if his body just shut down. I mean, I know when I saw him on Thursday at the media day, he definitely looked sucked down. He definitely looked like he was down in weight. But guess what? Conor McGregor looks like that a lot too. When he fought at 145, there were a couple times where I saw him and I was like, oh my God, it barely looks like Conor. You know what I mean? It's not uncommon for some of the guys who cut a lot of weight to look like that. It's just unfortunately, whatever happened with Khabib, his body seemed to backfire on him, and it didn't allow him to fight. So, unfortunately, he ended up in the hospital. And I remember, when we heard word from the UFC that he was in the hospital. Well, we heard the rumors first from the Russian media that he was in the hospital. And at that moment, I think everybody started to get it in their head the fight wasn't happening, because I can't remember the last time I heard a story where a fighter went to the hospital and his fight did happen. That's never a good sign, especially before a weigh-in. Never. I mean, you don't go to the hospital because you stubbed your toe the night before a weigh-in. You go there because your body's shutting down, like what has happened to Johnny Hendricks in the past, what has happened to Hayden Barao in the past, and now what has happened to Khabib Nurmagomedov. So it was an unfortunate turn of circumstances. And then Tony Ferguson, of course, got pulled off the card. I'm sure, I know he was devastated, bummed, brokenhearted that he didn't get the fight. He didn't get the interim title fight. And now what we're hearing is that Khabib is not going to be ready before, at the earliest would be May, but I've heard even that date is ambitious. And it's more likely he'll return at the end of summer because he has Ramadan coming up in May, which is, 30 days, I believe, is the timeline for that. His religious observance, which is fine. But obviously that's going to knock him out of action until, from the stories I've heard is late summer, like August, September. If that's the case, for Tony Ferguson, you have to begin to wonder, what's the next option? What do you do? And I'll talk more about that later because we have a guest on our show today who is interested in that fight. But the remainder of UFC 209 definitely took a hit without Tony Ferguson on the card. There's no doubt about that. Tony Ferguson and Khabib Nurmagomedov on the card. The card wasn't bad. I mean, Yuri Alcantara pulling off that late knee bar against Luke Sanders was amazing. Darren Elkins pulling off that incredible comeback against Mirsad Bektic. Who could have predicted that? And there were a lot of people, I'm not going to name names, and somebody who will listen to this podcast will know exactly who I'm talking about. But there was somebody who was talking to me before the fight and said, man, I can't believe that Darren Elkins is that much of an underdog. I think he was like a plus 400 or something, like really crazy odds. And they said, man, I wish I had put down 50. I should put down $50 on Darren Elkins. That was before the fight. I wish I wish I would have put down $50 on Darren Elkins. That's crazy odds. I was like, you never know. First round ends. I talked to the same person online. And, jokingly, they said, well, glad I didn't put that money down because Mirsad Bektic took it to Darren Elkins in that first round. Cut him up, blood everywhere. Looked like it was on its way to being a lopsided decision or a stoppage at some point, later in the fight. Somehow, miraculously, Darren Elkins fought his way back and knocked out Mirsad Bektic, arguably one of the best prospects in that division outside of maybe Yair Rodriguez. And the sheer sound of disappointment in the message I got online when he said, man, do I wish I had put down money on Darren Elkins. Actually had a guy on Twitter hit me up. I think he said he put down like $200 on Darren Elkins, won a bunch of money. So, yeah, craziness. You can never predict those things that could happen. But, those were both amazing performances. Alistair Overeem had a big knockout at the beginning of the card against Mark Hunt. That was amazing. But then everything else kind of after that, of course, you had the great fight between Lando Venata and David Tamer. That was a phenomenal fight. But again, it was bumped to co-main event after we lost out on Khabib and Tony. Now, if you have Khabib and Tony in that situation, and you have Lando and David Tamer, it just elevates the card. It's not that Lando and David Tamer was a bad fight. It was a great fight. It's just when you have a fight with so much magnitude attached to it, with so much anticipation attached to it, you can't replace it. There's no replacing a fight like that. And that's the disappointing side for Lando and David. Not that they put on a bad fight. They put on an excellent fight. But it's just not the fight that a lot of people paid to see. And that was Khabib and Tony. You had Dan Kelly pick up a big win. That was impressive. Maybe not the greatest fight in the world, but it was an impressive win. And then comes the main event. Now, the main event took a lot of beatings after this fight. And I think there's two sides to this. One, I would say that, if you didn't like the fight and you weren't a fan of it, that's okay. That's okay. Listen, if you're a fan and you've paid your money, and I'm a big believer in this, if you've paid your money, you paid your $60 to sit there, you paid your $100 to sit there, you paid your $200, whatever it is, you paid for your pay-per-view. If you're not happy with it, you're allowed to complain. Because at the end of the day, this is no different than a movie in a lot of ways. That if you pay for a movie and you walk out of that movie and you didn't like the movie, you're allowed to complain about that. You're allowed to say, man, I wish I hadn't spent $12 on that movie. You pay $100 for a seat at an arena for a fight card that you're really excited to see and it doesn't deliver in the way that you hoped it would deliver, you're allowed to voice your opinion. Okay? And no one should begrudge you that opinion. But at the same time, in a sport like mixed martial arts, it is in a lot of ways what I think it was Tyron Woodley who described, or maybe it was Wonder Boy, it is human chess in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? It is human chess. You're moving the pieces around the board and you got to be careful not to get knocked out. And I think my biggest takeaway from that fight, in all honesty, and this is in hindsight, I understand this is in hindsight. This was not the message I was saying 2 months ago, and this is not the message I was saying after UFC 205. I'm saying it now in hindsight, seeing the fight we got to see. I wish we had been able to see this fight later. Meaning, I wish both guys had fought other opponents and then come back together again maybe later this year. And the reason I say that is because what we saw in the rematch, in my opinion, was a lot of tentativeness from both guys. I don't think Woodley wanted to overexert himself because he didn't want to make a mistake and step into one of Wonder Boy's big counters or one of his big kicks. And I think Wonder Boy was doing a good job stalking Woodley around the cage, but then he wasn't unleashing because I think he didn't want to get too close out of fear of either getting the takedown or out of fear of getting caught with one of those big punches by Tyron Woodley, which is exactly what happened in the 5th round. And I think that closeness to the other fight had both of those guys kind of playing in their own heads about how they wanted to attack that bout. And I think, honestly, that's what happened. I think both guys were a little tentative and a little, maybe nerves. I don't know what the right word is for it. Cautious. Cautious is probably the best word to use. They were both cautious and they didn't want to make a mistake. And so what ultimately played out was a lot of posturing and not a lot of action. I thought Tyron Woodley won the fight 3-2. It was a close fight. Wasn't a great fight. Not a fight I'm going to go back and rewatch again. But listen, at the end of the day, you got to go out there and do what you got to do to win. If you are a NCAA level wrestler, NCAA champion, Olympic level champion wrestler, and you're facing a guy who is a striker with zero takedown defense, you don't go out there and throw hands with him just for the sake of him, for pleasing the crowd. Now, you can do that, and I don't fault you for that. But if you get knocked out, no one can sit there and say, oh, well, you got knocked out, tough luck. If you had that weapon, you had that wrestling, and you got to grind him on the ground, as boring as it may be, and listen, that's the sport, you know what I mean? So you got to weigh your consequences. Do you want to be an entertainer? Do you want to be a fighter? Do you want to be a winner? Sometimes the path of least resistance is the way to go. And I think even in the fight we saw, Tyron Woodley didn't take the path of least resistance because he probably could have taken Wonderboy down and won that way and grinded him on the ground, but he didn't do that. He chose to fight a different style. And listen, again, I'm not going to fault the guy for his game plan. He won. I mean, how are you going to fault him? He won the fight. And for Wonderboy, I don't think he thought he lost the fight, but I don't think he necessarily thought he won it either, if that makes sense. I think he knew 4 or 5 more strikes per round, and he probably could have pulled that one out outside of that 5th round because every other round was close. Rounds 1 through 4, to me, were all kind of toss-ups. None of them were lopsided. You had the one round where Woodley landed a takedown, I think. Was that round 3 or round 2? Other than that, the offense was pretty evenly matched. You can't judge by statistics at the end. Yes, Woodley outstruck Wonderboy by like 4 strikes, but that's nothing. You know what I mean? To me, 4 strikes don't really mean much. If it's lopsided like 100 to 50, that's when you're starting to look at statistics and saying, wow, what were the judges looking at? But it was close. And I think if Wonderboy would have been able to throw a few more kicks, throw a few more punches and land, he would have won that fight. But I think the fear of Tyron Woodley countering him with that big right hand or the takedown took him out of his game and never allowed him to do that. And that's where I think putting both of them against different opponents would have benefited them in the future. But again, this is hindsight. As I said, I was one of the people pounding the drum to say I want to see the rematch because the first fight ended in a draw. And I don't think anyone would say any different. But now that we sit here and we could look at the fight and we could look at it and say what happened, I think that's honestly what happened. I think both guys were so still caught in that moment from the first fight that they were so worried about making the littlest of mistakes to cost them the rematch that they didn't want to make those mistakes. It's just in the rematch, Tyron made less of those mistakes than Wonderboy did, and he ultimately won the fight, but that was minimal. And I think if he had fought Damian Maia and Wonderboy had fought like Robbie Lawler and both of them won and then they came back together, I think it would have been better. But again, this is hindsight. None of it matters. None of it matters because it already happened. So it is what it is. All right. With that said, we're going to talk to our first guest right now. He is in the main event this Saturday night, live on FS1. Main card starts at 10 p.m. He takes on Vitor Belfort, former welterweight contender, now potentially a middleweight contender as well. Let's talk right now to Kelvin Gastelum. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Just getting a little rest after practice. I got a little time for this.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time as always.
No worries, man. It's good to be on. Let's do it.
So how's everything, man? Obviously, I saw your Instagram post the other day, man. You're looking pretty yoked, man. I gotta imagine you're enjoying this middleweight fight right now.
Yeah, man. I'm enjoying my time at middleweight right now. And I'm beefing up a little bit. Because Vitor is a pretty big guy, so I got to make sure I'm able to keep up with that sort of strength.
Yeah. Before we talk about Vitor, let me talk about your last fight. What a phenomenal performance going out there beating Tim Kennedy the way you did. A lot of people, and myself included, I thought, man, Tim's such a big middleweight. Maybe this is going to be a big move for Kelvin, but man, you look good. You look size. You didn't give up a lot of size. Obviously didn't give up much power, and you beat a very legit middleweight threat. I mean, how did you feel in that fight versus maybe your last few fights at welterweight?
Yeah, man. Thank you very much, first of all, man. I remember looking at Tim Kennedy across the cage, and I was like, Oh man, he's a big boy, you know. Even when I was in that cage, I was looking at him. I was like, man, this is gonna be a rough night. But you know, thankfully everything worked out in my favor. I felt great. You know, I didn't cut any weight. It was the first time that's ever happened where I just pretty much just walked on the scale on weight. You know, so I'm expecting the same thing to happen for my next fight. So yeah, I just felt great.
Yeah, I know from having past conversations with you, Kelvin, that you've always said you feel like a natural welterweight. That's where you feel like you belong. But afterwards, you know, you got this opportunity to fight Vitor Belfort, a legend in the sport, you know, clearly a former champion and a top contender for years at middleweight. I mean, was it the opportunity to fight Vitor that kept you at middleweight, or was that something you kind of refined to yourself ahead of time to say, I am going to fight at middleweight again after the Tim Kennedy fight?
Yeah, no, it was just me. Me liking the fight. I like the matchup. I like the fight as it gets a legend like Vitor. And, you know, I just threw a name out there and they gave it to me. So I stuck with it. You know, what I had said is if they gave me a fight like Vitor Belfort, that I would stay. And if they continue to give me these kinds of fights that I enjoy at middleweight, then I would definitely stay at middleweight and you know, keep moving up the rankings and hopefully get a title shot at middleweight or welterweight. You know, my next fight I want it to be for a number one contender fight, and that's the only fight I'm willing to accept for my next fight is number one contender fight. The fight that'll guarantee you a title shot.
And that doesn't matter which division. If it's a number one contenders fight, that's what you want next.
Absolutely, and it doesn't matter in which division, whether it be in welterweight or middleweight. I'm game for both.
Yeah. Do you know, I mean, you've answered this question 1,000 times, and I'm sorry to hit it with you again, just because you did have such an awesome performance the last time out, and I think a lot of people are picking you to win this fight against Vitor. I mean, in your head, do you still feel like at some point you will be a welterweight again?
Yeah, in my head, yeah. I feel like welterweight's still my optimal weight class. I'm still, you know, figuring out my body and figuring out these weight cuts to make it easier. So, I'm still just growing and learning with this. You know, I'm rolling with the punches. You got to roll with the punches and learn and grow from these experiences.
Yeah. When you talk about your health, I mean, that's a big deal with weight cutting. You know, having been around wrestlers pretty much my whole life, I know what wrestlers put their body through to make weight. And then, you know, but obviously with wrestling, you have to wrestle the same day. But I mean, kind of give me a sense of how it was for your body, you know, going through those weight cuts and then fighting 24 hours later versus at least your last fight. And it's not like you hadn't fought a middleweight before. You went through the Ultimate Fighters at middleweight. So it's not like you were unexperienced like that. But I mean, how much of a difference did you see in your performance, in your reaction, in your health, all those different things? Conditioning. I mean, those are all factors that play, you know, that play into a difference between a hard weight cut and not so hard of a weight cut.
Yeah, well, I think more than anything, it's more of a mental aspect for me. Like, I was just so relieved the whole week, and it was just such an easy week that made my I think that made my fighting even better. Just not even have to think about the weight cut and not having to put my body physically through it was a big relief, was a big help, was a big mental relief. So I think that played a big difference as well.
Yeah. So now, you know, you get Vitor Belfort, a fight you wanted, but you are fighting him in Brazil. And I know that's you know, maybe it's a different age nowadays. I know Vitor took a lot of crap, you know, when he was on TRT and things like that when he was fighting in Brazil. But those days we hope are done. But still, you know, when you deal with the Brazilian side of fighting Vitor Belfort, the crowd, the judging, let's be honest, those kind of things. I mean, was there any of that concern of accepting a fight and then fighting him in Brazil?
You know what? I mean, not really. It hasn't really crossed my mind because I expect to finish this fight, and that's how confident I am. I'm confident in my training. I'm confident in my abilities. So I'm just real confident coming into the fight. I've got a pretty good winning streak, a 2-fight win streak, but against two really good guys, and it's brought my confidence up a little bit. You know, and I feel really good. I've also trained. I know that I'm well trained. I know that I'm well prepared for this fight, which makes my confidence grow even more. You know, because I know I'm ready for whatever Vitor brings. You know, and I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah. Vitor, has gone through a couple of tough performances lately, but we still know what kind of danger he brings into the fight. I mean, I remember the fight with Chris Weidman where he had Weidman trapped against the cage and he's unloading on him, and it ended up going Chris's way, but there were a couple of moments where you thought, man, we might have a new champion right here. But what do you think of Vitor now? What kind of a Vitor do you expect to come out in this fight? Especially, and again, I know fighting in Brazil, I think a lot of people, a lot of Brazilians tell me, he's still the biggest star in Brazil, even maybe bigger than Anderson Silva. So I imagine he's going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at you to try to win this fight.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that, but he's been up, he's been down, and he's been in the game for 20 years. You don't go through the game 20 years without knowing and growing from your experiences. And I think he's comfortable in the position that he's in. So I think he's trained well. He's mentally prepared and physically prepared coming into the fight. So I expect the best Vitor Belfort. This might be his last fight, so I expect him to be at his best.
Yeah, when you know a guy is going through that, he mentioned, there was people that heard, maybe he had that Instagram post, I think it was, where he kind of hinted at retirement, then he said, no, that's not the case. But now he is getting this fight in Brazil. It's a main event. Maybe it is his swan song. We don't know. I guess we'll find out after you fight him. But when you fight a guy like that who's kind of, at that point in his career, I mean, you got to feel like I said, he's going to throw everything he can. He's going to break everything he can in training to make sure he's ready for this fight. So I got to imagine whether Vitor's coming off a couple losses or 10 straight wins, I imagine you're expecting the best, most dangerous Vitor Belfort we've ever seen.
You hit it right on the money. I expect the best Vitor Belfort, whether he's coming off a loss or whether he's coming off a win, he's dangerous. And if you look at the middleweight division and who's got the most first round finishes, his name is at the top of the list. And in the division, so he's dangerous,
Yeah. A few times in your UFC career now, Kelvin, you've had the chance to fight down in Mexico, and I know as the UFC continues to expand into Latin America, I know you're a big part of those plans. You felt that love, of the Mexican crowd. You felt the adoration you feel of fighting in front of the Mexican fans. This time it's going to be kind of the reverse because you're going to step into Brazil with, like I said, arguably the biggest superstar in Brazilian history. You're going to hear the chants, the "Uva Mahe," all those chants. I mean, how do you feel about that? Because you felt the love on one side. Now you're going to feel the other side, where you kind of get to be, not that you're a bad guy, but you know what I mean. They're obviously
No, I totally get it. And I'm prepared for that. But man, it's funny that I'm on Twitter a lot. I'm on Instagram a lot, and I have a lot of Brazilians just saying, hey, I'm Brazilian, but I'm going to root for you in this fight against Vitor. Like, lots. So we'll see. We'll see what the Brazilian response is like for Kelvin Gastelum, because I'm actually getting a lot of support.
Yeah,
from the Brazilian crowd,
and that's a good thing to have when you're stepping into Brazil, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm expecting the worst for sure.
Yeah. You've only suffered 2 defeats in your career, Kelvin, and both were very close. Split decisions in both cases. One to the welterweight champ of the world, and the other one to Neil Magny, and that was a battle again. But now that you have gone out there and you dominated Tim Kennedy the way you did, do you feel like you are kind of hitting your stride where you want to be as an athlete? Because I think a lot of people forget, when you came to the UFC, you were still very young. You've kind of learned on the job a little bit, kind of grown and progressed as a fighter while you've been in the UFC. Do you feel like right now you are kind of hitting your stride and we are seeing the best Kelvin Gastelum we've ever seen?
Right. You're exactly right. When I won the Ultimate Fighter, I was 21. I had no idea what I was doing, and I've had, I didn't know what it was like to be a professional fighter. I didn't know what it was like to have to be on a diet. I didn't know what it was like to have to learn a whole new lifestyle, learn about business, learn about all these things. So I've had to learn as I grow, and all these experiences, I feel like. I finally put them all together. This will be my 12th or 11th or 12th UFC fight, and finally I feel like everything's coming together from all those experiences, the good ones, the bad ones, putting it all together and creating something really powerful that the people are going to see March 11th against Vitor Belfort. You know, I feel like finally I am hitting that stride that you say. I'm a better athlete, I'm a better fighter, I'm more aware of things that I wasn't up before, and just trying new things in practice. So I'm growing and learning at a very fast pace now that I'm able to put it all together.
Yeah. You know, when you made your middleweight, you know, move, I won't say debut because obviously you kind of debuted as a middleweight, but now that you move back to middleweight and, you know, you've kind of made a rise. I mean, you jumped in the top 10 with your first fight, you know, back at 185. You beat Tim Kennedy, you jump in the top 10. Now you're fighting a guy ranked number 8, former champion, one of the best in the world. What kind of a statement do you think you send to the middleweight division if you go out there and you finish Vitor Belfort the way you're talking about? If you go out there and beat him in a somewhat similar fashion to what you did to Tim Kennedy, I mean, what kind of a statement do you send to Anderson Silva, Robert Whittaker, you know, Gegard Mousasi, the guys who are kind of right in front of you in the division?
You know what? Anybody ranked in front of me, or fights that are interesting, to be honest. You know, but to be honest, the only fight that I want to take is the number 1 contender. It doesn't matter in which division. You know, I was supposed to fight Cowboy Cerrone, and you know, I was hoping my career would end up going another route. I was hoping to get a number 1 contender fight after that fight, or a title shot. But you know, now I'm going another route. I'm going a middleweight route. Let's ask for the number 1 contender fight at middleweight. You know, after this fight, of course.
Yeah. I'm not going to play matchmaker too much, Kelvin, because your focus is Vitor Belfort, so I don't want to take it away from that, but I'd be remiss if I didn't ask the question. Sure. You know, when you look at this division, we hope, or we assume, I guess, Yoel Romero will end up fighting Michael Bisping. That's always a question mark, but assuming that fight happens.
Right.
You know, you got Luke Rockhold, you got Jacare, probably is the number 1 and number 2 guys out there. Now, Jacare has complained to say that a lot of guys don't want to fight him. They're not stepping up. He took a couple shots at Luke because Luke was injured. I don't want to get into that whole mess, and obviously Luke is out there as well. But is that kind of where you're thinking about after this fight? Maybe Jacare, maybe Luke Rockhold, because I think that's kind of where most people are at is, you know, one of those two would probably be the next guy in line for a title shot, taking nothing away from Robert Whittaker. He's on a great win streak as well. I just don't think he's in that same conversation yet.
Yeah, either or. You know, either or. They're both big problems in front, but I'm willing to rise up to the occasion like I have most of my career. So I'm game for either or.
Yeah. Last question for you, Kelvin. I know this is such a gotcha question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because you're a guy who says you want a number 1 contenders fight at middleweight, welterweight, whatever they come back, and you've said your career at welterweight is not done. So put on your Conor McGregor hat for me for a second. In your mind, before your UFC career is over, do you feel like we will be talking about Kelvin Gastelum as a 2-division champion? Maybe not same time, but you know what I mean. Do you feel like at some point you could be champion of middleweight and eventually go back and conquer welterweight as well?
Why not? Why not? Other people are doing it, so why not? Why not? I feel like I have the abilities to compete with the best middleweights and with the best welterweights, so why not? You know, all I need is self-belief, and that's what Conor McGregor had. Everybody thought he was crazy except himself. He went out and did it, so why not think that I can go out and do it?
Yeah, well, I think you got the ability, man. Like I said, you look better than ever in your last fight, and I love this matchup with Vitor. Big platform, big main event, and I know that's what you want to be a part of, and I'm sure this is a great opportunity for you to go out there and shine once again.
Absolutely, man. I'm excited to show the world what I can do, the next step of my career, and I'm excited for it. So thank you for having me on.
Of course, Kelvin. I appreciate it, man. Safe travels down to Brazil, of course, man. Best of luck in the fight, and look forward to catching up again soon.
Take care, brother.
All right, bye-bye. Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans proudly supports the Fight Society podcast. When it comes to the big decision of choosing a mortgage lender, it's important to work with someone you can trust who has your best interests in mind. And with Rocket Mortgage, you'll get a transparent online process that gives you the confidence to make an informed decision. Don't waste time searching through stacks of paperwork. With Rocket Mortgage, you can securely share your financial info to get a mortgage approval in minutes. You can even adjust the rate and length of your loan in real time to make sure you get the mortgage solution that's right for you. Whether you're looking to buy a home or refinance your existing mortgage, you can lift the burden of getting a home loan with Rocket Mortgage. So skip the bank, skip the waiting, and go completely online at quickenloans.com/MMA. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLS, consumeraccess.org number 3030. A big thank you, of course, to Kelvin Gastelum for coming on the show. Looking forward to his fight this Saturday night against Vitor Belfort. Right now, we're going to talk to our next guest. He is in the top 10 of the lightweight division. He's been out of action for a little while, been itching to get back in there. His name is Michael Chiesa. He was supposed to fight Tony Ferguson last July. Had to deal with a back injury that knocked him out of the fight, and unfortunately, he never got back to that fight. Tony ended up fighting Lando Venata on that card, and then he ended up fighting Rafael dos Anjos a few months later. But now Michael Chiesa has been gunning for a fight with Eddie Alvarez. We now know that fight is not happening because Eddie Alvarez has been scheduled for a bout at UFC 211, which, by the way, side note, insane card. Talk about that more in a second. But Michael Chiesa was gunning for a fight with him, didn't get it. Now he's got to wait and see what else is out there. So let's talk to Michael Chiesa about what comes next for him and what fight he wants most in this division. One of the top 10 lightweights in the world joins us now, Michael Chiesa. Michael, welcome back to the show. How's everything?
Things are good, man. You know, in the wake of that whole Eddie Alvarez thing, that kind of sucked, but, you know, I'm moving on to other things, and everything's good over here, man. How about yourself?
I'm good, man. I'm good, and that's part of the reason I'm calling, of course. I know that we're seeing lightweight fights being made. Things are happening, and yet we're not seeing your name, which is, I'm sure, frustrating considering you're, number 7 in the world, 3-fight winning streak, and yet you're not getting booked for a fight. I got to imagine that's a little frustrating.
You know, it's definitely frustrating, but here's the thing, man. You're a smart man. You know the sport, and 155 pounds is the hardest division in the world, and to get together a 3-fight win streak, win 5 of your last 6, you know, I think 3 performance bonuses in the mix of that. You know, I don't want to take a backward step, man. There's not an easy fight in this division, and, you know, I'm trying to continue where I left off before I had to pull out with the injury, you know, and that's the main reason why I asked for that Eddie Alvarez fight. I mean, before I got hurt, I was slotted to face Tony Ferguson when he was ranked 3rd. And, you know, at this point in time, Eddie's ranked 3rd, and, you know, I'm coming off an injury layoff. He's coming off a loss. To me, it was just a fight that made sense. And, you know, it's just unfortunate that it didn't get to happen.
Yeah. Now, was the fight ever, actually discussed, or was it just the fight you wanted?
No, it was discussed. Listen, him being a former champion, him being ranked, he gets first choice. You know, they gave him a list of guys, and, you know, he gets to choose, and rightfully so. He earned that right to be able to pick amongst the guys that he was offered. But I do know that the UFC was pushing more for the fight with me than others. It's just unfortunate he didn't take it. You know, I can't get anybody to come on record and say that, but just, you know, my behind-the-scenes connections I have, I know that was, they wanted that fight. They liked that fight, and they made it clear that that's kind of what they wanted. And, you know, it's just unfortunate that it didn't happen. Here's the thing for me, man. I've been back in training for 4 or 5 months now, and my biggest thing is I've made it this far, and I don't want to take a step back. I want to continue where I left off. I want to fight the guys in rank 1, 2, and 3. And with the landscape of that division right now, it's not out of the realm of being a good choice. You know what I mean? Like, look at the guys that are coming off wins and losses, and just look at the landscape of the top 15. I think I've earned the right to fight those guys.
Yeah, this is not me taking a shot at Eddie Alvarez, so I'm not trying to do that. But I want to get your thoughts. Why do you think Eddie ended up fighting Dustin Poirier instead of you?
You know, I think that I'm not trying to be totally disrespectful and be an arrogant prick, but I just don't think he wanted to fight with me. A bad match. I think that, you know, Dustin Poirier is tough as shit. We all know that, but that's a better matchup for him than me. You know what I mean? I'm a big lightweight. I'm going to lock my hands around him and try to get the floor and I'm going to choke you out. You know what I mean? And I just don't think that he really wanted anything to do with my business. And, I don't blame him. I wasn't looking for the fight with Eddie as some type of easy matchup type thing. I just looked at it like, hey, like I said, he's coming off the loss. I'm coming off the injury layoff. He's ranked third. Last time I was supposed to fight, Tony Ferguson. He was ranked third. Screw it, let's make this fight. And then you go on Ariel's show and you sit there and say that you act like you don't know who I am. And then you say you don't want to take any, fighting me is too big of a step in the backwards direction. When it's like, dude, I'm ranked ahead of Dustin. You know what I mean? I'm a step in the right direction. A fight with me is going to get you closer to a title shot. You know what I mean? And why he didn't choose to fight with me, we'll never know. But if I was a betting man, I'd say he just doesn't want to my business. I don't blame him.
Yeah. How frustrating is it when you put together the kind of win streak that you have? And, listen, injuries are part of the sport. You were going to fight Tony Ferguson. You didn't get a chance to do that. But, how frustrating is it that you want these big fights? You want these kind of marquee fights and guys aren't fighting you?
Here's the thing. Eddie's the first guy to say no. If you look at it, I asked the Ferguson fight after my last fight when I fought Meneil. They gave me that fight. They warranted me that right to fight the guys in the top three. It's just unfortunate that I had to pull out of that fight with my back injury. Now that Eddie's moved on, why can't I set my sights on guys like Khabib and Tony? You know what I mean? Some people are like, why don't you take a tune-up fight? Why don't you take an easy fight? And I tell them, are you stupid? There's not an easy fight at 155 pounds. Look at the guys that aren't even ranked. You got guys not in the top 15 like James Vick, Kevin Lee, Adriano Martins. You got Islam Makhachev. You got Leo Santos. You got all these guys that are freaking studs that aren't ranked. Where's the easy matchup? Where's the easy tune-up fight? Who's it? So I just want to continue where I'm left off. I want to fight the best guys in my division right now. I don't know what's going on with Connor. I don't know what's going on with Khabib and Tony, but I'm throwing my name in the mix. And, why not take a fight? I'd take a fight with Ferguson. You know what I mean? I don't know if he wants to wait for Connor. I don't know if he wants to risk trying to fight Khabib again. But I'd take the fight with Ferguson. And if he wants to wait for Connor, then I'll fight Khabib. It's that simple. Why is that not? Why can't that happen? That's what I want to know is why can't that happen? It makes sense.
Yeah.
On a 3-fight win streak, I'm ranked 8th. The only guy that's also on a win streak within the top 10 is me, is Edson Barboza.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I admit, Mike, I have a little bit of an ulterior motive for asking and talking to you tonight, because my thought was we've heard rumors. Now, I know nothing's 100% confirmed, but we've heard rumors that Khabib isn't going to be ready for a couple of months, and he has Ramadan. Now, I respect his religious beliefs, and for him to take some time off, and there's been rumors. I know his dad said something to the Russian press that he may not return until September, and again, that's his decision. I understand that, but if that's the case, this is me playing Sean Shelby, this is me playing matchmaker, but what about you and Tony for an interim title, maybe in July, International Fight Week? Again, you were going to fight him last year. I know you were heartbroken not to get that fight. I don't know. What do you think? Am I playing good matchmaker here?
I think we're operating on the same wavelength. That's the fight I'm pushing for right now. That's where my head's at now. You know what I mean? I was pushing for Eddie on the pretense that Khabib and Tony were going to fight. You know what I mean? And now that fight fell through, I've immediately shifted gears. And it's Khabib or Tony. And if Khabib's going to be out till September, then I would love more than anything the opportunity to compete against Tony. Let's finish. We have unfinished business. We were on the back end of a training camp for each other when I had to pull out of the fight, and Tony was respectful of that. He knows what it's like to have to pull out of a fight on short order. But dude, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. Let's do this. You know what I mean? I don't know if he wants to wait for Connor, and I don't blame him if he does. Man, he's earned the right. Dude. He's on a 9-fight win streak. Dude's a killer. You know what I mean? But if he wants to fight between now and then, I am 110% ready to go. I will sign on the dotted line right now. I'm not. This is not an exaggeration. This is a fight that I've had my eye on for over a year. You know what I mean? I had my sights set on a Tony Ferguson fight for a long time. They actually almost matched us up at UFC 173 back when Dillashaw fought Barral the first time. We almost ended up fighting. We almost fought each other, but they ended up splitting us up and having us fight different guys.
So now you were going to fight him last year. That was your last scheduled fight, so it's not like it was out of the realm of possibility. But how do you feel like you match up with Tony Ferguson? You were literally days away from fighting him the last time.
I think I match up great with anybody in the division, honestly. A fight between me and Tony, dude, it's got excitement all over it. I mean, Tony's won 6 bonuses in his last 5 fights. You know, me, I've won 5 bonuses in my whole 9-fight UFC career. I've won 5 bonuses. My last 2 were in my last 2 fights. I mean, we're just guys that go out there and get after it. We're not going to take a step backwards. We're going to beat each other up, and ultimately, you know, I aim to see my hand get raised. That's the way I envision that fight going. And it's going to be tough, but it's going to be fun, and it's going to be something special. I mean, that's why they almost made the fight the first time. You know what I mean? Me and Tony bring it. A lot of guys don't bring it the way me and Tony do. You know, different styles. Tony's awkward striking, you know, and all his scrolling submissions and all his, you know, he does a lot of very fun things. Me, I just walk straight in, get in your face, take one to give one, and force you to make mistakes. You know what I mean? A lot of the things that we do are similar, and I like that matchup a lot. I think it's fun. I think it's a great thing for my career. 2 tough champions, arguably 2 of the best tough champions they've ever had. I mean, why not? Let's run it back and let's finish what we started.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on possibly being for an interim title? I mean, I know Tony said he wants the title. That's what he was supposed to fight for when he got Khabib. It fell through again. That's what happens. You know, we can sit here and talk all day about the weight cutting and all that stuff. But if Conor's out, and it certainly sounds like he's not coming back anytime, at least in the next few months, what do you think about an interim title? Are you down for that?
A world title, it's in my destiny in the sport. That's what I'm here to do. You know, I've been vocal since the day I got in the UFC that I aim to be a world champion, and I know I'm going to be a world champion. And ultimately, for it being an interim title, that's what I want. I want a title fight. You know, here's the thing, man. I've been in the UFC 5 years now. 5 years this month I've been in the UFC. If you put my tough fights on my record, altogether, I'm 11-2 in the UFC. I deserve a big fight. You know what I mean? I'm not out bitching about money or none of that shit. I don't, you know, that stuff is secondary to me. First and foremost, I deserve a big fight, and me and Tony for an interim title is perfect. Why not? Let's do it. You know what I mean? I'm ready, you know? This whole injury layoff thing, I'm not worried about it. I know I'm a competitor. I've been in the gym the last 5 months. I'm ready to go. Let's do this.
Yeah, well, I was looking at the top 10, and, you know, when I was thinking about the Eddie Alvarez fight, and then, of course, I saw your name, and I said, you know what, this would be a perfect matchup for Tony. If Khabib's out, and again, I'm not trying to slight Khabib. We don't know 100% what's going on with him, but it certainly sounds like he's not going to fight before, at the earliest, May, and then from what I'm hearing is possibly September. There's nobody else. I mean, Tony already fought Edson, and I love Edson Barbosa, man. He's a great guy. He's got a fight coming up this weekend, obviously, against Benil Dariush, a guy you know. You know, there's no guarantee he's going to win that fight, but he has fought Tony before. We haven't seen you and Tony fight. We didn't get to see it last July. I mean, if there's no better matchup for the interim title right now, if Khabib's out of the picture, I think it is you and Tony.
Hey, man, I'm all about it. You know, there's people I was actually discussing that with tonight. I was talking to my manager, Daniel Rubenstein, about it, and, you know, I'm going to aim that direction, you know what I mean? And I'm not avoiding anybody. There isn't a man that walks God's green earth on 2 feet that I will avoid a fist fight with. Best believe your sweet ass. But I aim for the big fights. I deserve the big fights, and that's why my focus has been on these guys like Eddie Alvarez, Tony Ferguson, Khabib. Like, you know, dude, I almost fought at 209. If Tony wouldn't have came to terms with the UFC, it would have been me and Khabib. You know what I mean? I'm already in the talks for these things. Let's just make them happen. Like, let's not quit teasing that golden carrot in front of my face and just give it to me. I mean, I deserve it.
Yeah.
I mean, I put my time in. I deserve a big fight. Me and Tony Ferguson, interim title. Let's do this. We can do it tomorrow. We can do it May 13th, June, July. I don't care. Let's do it.
Well, that was my next question. You're healthy and ready to go. You were ready to go at UFC 209 last weekend, so clearly you're chomping at the bit to get back in there. And again, I'm just throwing out ideas because, you know, we know the card in Dallas already has 2 title fights. It's pretty stacked up. We don't know what's going on with June yet, so there's a possibility, but that's going to be in Brazil, so we know there's a couple fights down there. But again, I'm thinking International Fight Week. I mean, are you okay waiting until July if that's what was offered?
Dude, if it's for a world title, I'll wait till July.
It's worth the wait.
110%. Oh, yeah, absolutely, man. There's, you know, when you get to a certain point in the sport, waiting sometimes isn't always a wrong decision. You know what I mean? You get a good win streak going. You get yourself in a good position. As long as you don't rush anything, good things will come to you. You know what I mean? And I think that it's unfortunate I got hurt. It could have been me fighting at 209 against Khabib and getting shafted the way Tony did had I fought him in July and won. You know what I mean? So I think that we're meant to fight each other. I think this is all meant to be. And, I hope that my gut's right. I hope that it's me and Tony for the interim title. It's the fight to make.
Yeah. Well, I know, and again, I'm a huge Khabib Nurmagomedov fan, man. I love that guy. He's a nice guy, too. I know he gets a bad rap here and there, but he's a really nice guy. But also, when you deal with the weight cutting situation, it's different than you having a back injury. You got injured in training. That happens. I mean, Tony's had to pull out of a fight before. Every fighter probably at some point has had to pull out of a fight, do it in an injury. But you heard Dana. The concerns. Could Khabib cut the weight? Is that something we have to worry about? All those kind of things. So, I mean, there's also that plays a factor. I mean, listen, this is not me taking a slide on Khabib. It's just being honest. Like, you've never missed weight. We're not worried about that. You had an injury. So, I mean, if Tony's worried about those quote-unquote assurances of Khabib actually making weight, he wouldn't have to worry about that with you.
Dude, for a title fight, I would tape my limbs back together and show up and fight. You know what I mean? And here's the thing. That was the first time I've ever had to pull out of a fight with an injury. That I showed up for UFC 157, my first UFC fight after Tough. I had knee surgery 5 weeks before. I could send you a picture of me doing my photo shoot where you can see half my leg is shaved still. Like half my leg had no hair on it from getting surgery. You know what I mean? I'm no stranger to having to step in there with unforeseen circumstances like injury. And it sucked at that time with Tony. There's no way I could tough it out. It just was not a logical decision. But, I'm past that. I'm healed. I'm better. I'm doing all the things to maintain my body more. And, there's definitely a new turn in my training where I'm maintaining that same intensity, but I'm doing a lot more maintenance on my body, so I'm performing better. So I think that, this is the time to make the fight. Let's do it. Let's finish where we left off. We were supposed to fight July 13th, 2016. It's a new year. Let's do a new matchup, and let's do it for 5 rounds for an interim title. I'm all about it.
Yeah, I love it. Clearly, I have an agenda, Mike. I fully admit I have an agenda because I love that matchup. We didn't get to see it last year. I was bummed out. I know you were obviously bummed out. And like I said, if Khabib's out of action, there's no better matchup to make. So I think it should be you and Tony for the interim title, International Fight Week. Like I said, man, Sean Shelby, send me a check. I'm doing your matchmaking for you. That's all I'm saying.
What? I really appreciate your level of intelligence. I think that you and I should become friends. You want to do karate in the garage?
I'm all about karate in the garage, dude. I am all about it.
Let's do it.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you taking the time, man. Like I said, I hope this all comes together. Hopefully next time we talk, it's when this fight is booked and you're ready to fight for an interim title. You got Tony Ferguson. I hope it all comes together for you, man. It's been too long. I know you're itching to get back in there, and I think this is the fight you deserve. I really do.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate that. And, thanks for having me on the show and giving me a chance to speak my opinion on the landscape of the lightweight division. Me and Tony Ferguson. I just want to say, lastly, I love my mom, and much love to the best manager in the business, Daniel Rubenstein.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it, Mike. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, sir.
All right, bye-bye. A big thanks, of course, to Michael Chiesa for coming on the show. I feel him on this one. I mean, listen, there's a lot of unknowns right now with Khabib Nurmagomedov, and in a perfect world, we're going to see Khabib and Tony fight later this year because neither one of them is going to get Conor McGregor right now. I do believe Conor is going to continue to push for that fight with Floyd Mayweather until that fight is no longer a viable option. Now, you can sit here and say it's not a viable option now, and I would say that's wrong because I do know that both sides want it to happen, and when you got hundreds of millions of dollars on the line of potentially being made, I think that both guys will do everything in their power to put this fight together. Whether you love it or you hate it, that's the fight both of those guys want until Conor McGregor knows it is completely dead in the water and there's no chance that he's going to get that Floyd Mayweather fight. Does he come back and fight in the UFC? So if I'm Tony Ferguson, I have two options. I either wait until Khabib is healthy and ready to go, which could be September, or you face a guy like Michael Chiesa somewhere in like July at like an International Fight Week card, maybe a co-main event, maybe a main event, depending on how many cards they do that week. If they do more than one card, you got the card in Anaheim, which is in Tony's backyard. I know back in January, Tony was advocating to land on that card. He thought he was going to fight Khabib on that January card that was in Anaheim, which is right in his backyard. He's an Orange County guy. So, I mean, I think that would be a big one if you put Khabib and Tony headlining. Now again, or Khabib and Chiesa is one of the headliners for that card. Interim title, I know, interim titles, I hate them too, but it's a big fight. And if you're Tony Ferguson, do you want to sit and wait on the possibility of fighting Khabib in September or later? Or do you want to fight somebody like Michael Chiesa and go ahead and get your hands on the title and then maybe defend it against Khabib later? Because either way, I don't see Conor coming back before 2018 as long as this Floyd Mayweather fight is on the table. As long as that fight's on the table, Conor is not fighting in the UFC this year. I really don't believe so. And even when he comes back, I'm not sold it's going to be against Khabib or Tony. I still believe the Nate Diaz match is the other possibility. Now, I do mention Nate Diaz because I think Nate Diaz and Tony Ferguson would be a monstrous fight. And for an interim lightweight title, I think that would be huge if Khabib is out of the picture for a little while. The problem is, I still don't know if you're going to get Nate Diaz to sign on to a fight like that. Nate has made it clear he wants big fights, he wants money fights, and I think the money fight for him is the Conor trilogy, but if he loses to Tony Ferguson, then he doesn't get that Conor trilogy. And I think right now, even if Conor comes back tomorrow, I'm not sold that he would fight Tony or Khabib. I think ultimately, Conor's first fight back in the UFC will still be against Nate Diaz. I still think that's the most likely scenario. It makes him the most money, and listen, I love Tony, I love Khabib, but that's still going to be the biggest fight. So if you're Tony, maybe you fight Chiesa. Maybe you get it. And listen, it's not an easy fight. Chiesa's a tough dude. So, but at the end of the day, it's a paycheck. You get an interim title. You get some money. You get to, maybe you wait for Khabib. I don't know. It's just, I think I understand both sides of the argument that comes from, do you sit and wait or do you not wait? I understand both of it. You know what I mean? Damian Maia is about to find out in May if he made the right decision or not. Now, if he beats Jorge Masvidal, we can all pat him on the back and say, good job, you made a great call, you made some money, you stayed active, and now you get Tyron Woodley. If he loses, then everyone's saying, what are you doing? Why did you take that fight? Oh my God, why didn't you just sit out? That's the sport, folks. There's no guarantees. When Tyron Woodley decided not to fight after he lost out on the Johnny Hendricks fight when Johnny couldn't make weight, he took a gamble. Now, he had to wait past Carlos Condit and Robbie Lawler fighting, and they had to wait some more. And he had to wait till July to finally get his fight. So he had to sit out all that time before he finally got the fight with Robbie Lawler. But he got it, and he made the most of it. Now, kudos to Tyron Woodley. He played the game, and he gambled, and he won. But there's also numerous times where guys have taken that same shot, gambled, and lost. So there's no guarantees is my point. Damian Maia could have waited and still not gotten the title shot. Because we don't know. We just don't know. Tyron Woodley just fought. There's no guarantee they're going to book him and Damian Maia tomorrow. Maybe Georges St. Pierre fights Michael Bisping in July, loses, and says, I'm going back to welterweight, give me Tyron Woodley. Or maybe he wins and says, now I want to go back and get a second title at welterweight, give me Tyron Woodley. I don't know. Maybe Nick Diaz comes out of the woodwork and says, you know what, I'm sick of this. That last fight was boring. Give me Tyron Woodley. And the UFC, I love you, Damian Maia, but the UFC would probably give it to him. And I don't think they'd necessarily be wrong in that, even though Nick Diaz hasn't won a fight in several years. I understand that. But in terms of the money, in terms of the magnitude, in terms of the attention, Nick Diaz is a bigger fight. So again, there's no guarantees. There's no guarantees. The only guarantee Maia would have had waiting this long would be if Wonder Boy somehow, had gotten hurt before UFC 209 and they pulled in Maia as a late notice replacement. That's it. That was the only, and even that wasn't a guarantee, but that's probably the only guarantee he would have had. Otherwise, there are no guarantees. So what do you do in these situations? Do you sit and wait or do you fight? If I'm Tony Ferguson, I just came off a big camp, an expensive camp, a camp that I trained and worked my ass off for. If they say, hey, we want you to fight Michael Chiesa in July for an interim title, and we're going to pay you a lot of money, take it. That's my opinion. Take it. You're getting a title, you're getting a lot of money, you're getting a fight that you were supposed to have last year. Why not? Yes, it's high risk, high reward, but every fight's high risk, high reward. He fought Lando Venata on short notice. Lando nearly won that fight. That's high risk, high reward. That's the sport. You got to do what you got to do. So we'll see. We'll see how it all plays out. I know Michael Chiesa wants to fight. Whether or not Tony Ferguson does or is even interested, we'll have to wait and see. All right, want to say a big thank you, of course, to both Kelvin Gastelum and Tony Ferguson and Michael Chiesa for coming on the show. Kelvin Gastelum and Michael Chiesa for coming on the show, Next week, we'll be back. We're going to preview a little bit of UFC London. Jimmy Manuwa taking on Corey Anderson in the main event there. And I want to say a big thank you, of course, to everyone that tunes into the Fight Society podcast each and every week. Make sure you check us out on iTunes, SoundCloud. Make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes. And we'll be back next week with more Fight Society podcasts. My name is Damon Martin, and we'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in.